unite and work together if we're all going to get through this.
Sounds like socialism to me.
The amount of people I see talking about socialism positively is actually staggering.
Do you think, do you really think that a proletarian revolution is just around the corner in America?
If Bernie Sanders were president, right, and he wanted to bring the same ideas as for socialism into this country, do you think that we would benefit?
Yeah.
But I just told you Venezuela's eating rats.
But I just want people to have health care.
A lot has changed in the past 300 years. People are no longer obsessed with the accumulation of things. We have eliminated hunger, want, the need for possessions. We've grown out of our infancy.
Welcome back to the Sensible Socialist Podcast. This is episode 6, A Communist Vision for a New World.
This is the 24th century. Material needs no longer exist.
Then what's the challenge?
The challenge, Mr. Offenhouse, is to improve yourself, to enrich yourself. Enjoy it.
All right, welcome back. So last week I talked with Josh Morris, and we were talking about the many worlds of American communism. And during the discussion, we were talking about how a lot of like socialists and communists, people on the left generally tend to talk pretty negatively. You know, it's a lot about what we don't like, what we don't want, and not a whole lot about what we want and what we want to actually build. A lot of what we want to tear down, not a lot of what we want to build. So I thought today I would talk a bit about what I think we're trying to build. It's really one of the most common questions you get if you say you're a socialist or a communist is, give me an example of one that's worked, or what does it even look like? What are you fighting for? Don't tell me what you're against. Tell me what you're for. And so it's natural. Socialism comes out of a critique of capitalism. So it is going to have this core of criticism where it's a lot of what we don't like about what is going on now. And if you're to have a perspective, that's not really utopian, but is intended to be sort of scientific, you can't really make good predictions about exactly what the system is going to be after it, because you don't know how exactly you're going to get there. How you get there is going to depend on a lot of different factors. So the difficulty with that is that when you say something like, we need a socialist society, or I'm a communist because I want to build a communist society, most people, I think, that'll conjure up images of the Soviet Union or China or North Korea. And so if that's not what you mean when you say you want to build a socialist society, then you need to make an argument as to what it is that you mean. And so this is my attempt to do that. So the first thing I'd say, just a quick thing about the revolution. So the first thing I think that's important to say is that a revolutionary change is what's necessary to change any mode of production. So history has sort of shown that. So there is always what is a change in the mode of production is really revolution itself. There has to be this break with the old order, and that doesn't necessarily have to be what we have seen in the past in terms of how that's happened, in terms of violence and war and those kinds of things. It has happened that way, and it has happened that way for a lot of historically significant but historically distinct reasons. And so I think that you can make an argument that revolution and revolutionary change do not necessarily have to be violent or anything like that, but that there are a certain set of circumstances that will produce violence in the course of revolutionary change. So the revolutions are some of the most unpredictable kinds of human events. The only one that I think is in some ways less predictable is probably war. So trying to map out exactly how a revolution could succeed really depends on a lot of different factors and change, daily with the way that politics develops. A way that you would understand a revolution in the United States before the election of Donald Trump is different than after the election of Donald Trump. And so you have to take into account all of the different factors in terms of where you want to go. So that being said, I think that you could make an argument that there's a way to measure whether or not you've had, or you'd be able to mark some kind of successful socialist revolution. And so from the sort of definitions episode, the socialist system being the period of transition from when you take the means of production out of the hands of private individuals and put it in the hands of the people who work at those industries. And in the case of large public utilities and things like that, in control of elected councils that are recallable and set up in democratic principles. So the idea being, the basic measurement of a successful socialist revolution would be a capture of the state, so political control over the state apparatus, so which allows you to find a mechanism, a legal mechanism, to remove the means of production out of the hands of individuals and into cooperative enterprises. So you need to also build cooperative enterprises that you can transfer those rights to, and at the same time you need to remove the means for which the former ruling class can reassert its dominance. So it just means like control over the military basically and the police forces, so that there's no way that you're going to have violent counter-revolutionary control. Now this definitely obviously can have consequences that go way too far and produce a significant long series of unfortunate social structures which prohibit the ability for a genuine transfer of power to the working class, which I think is what happened in many places that have attempted to have something like a socialist revolution. But I also think that at the same time, what you need to do is you're finding a way to transfer the means of ownership back to the workers, but you have to create a large welfare system so that you're basically able to carry out the promise that you're going to satisfy everyone's basic needs. And so in a wildly productive system like the one that capitalism has created for us, in which we are indebted to it, we have to take that over so that there aren't homeless people, that there aren't people without jobs if they want them, that we'll be able to remove the disincentives and the things that prohibit us from doing all of these kinds of necessary work like infrastructure and different things like that, so that you're creating a system where everyone has the ability to work, the ability to maintain a decent amount of substandard, a certain standard of living, and that are able to be free, therefore, to pursue their ultimate goals. The way that you're able, and then at the same time, what you'd have in a socialist transition is significant amounts of democratic elections in anywhere that there are decision-making bodies that affect you or the people around you, and protections so that you still have minority rights within that. So a principled democratic system in which there are rights that you cannot trample over with just by majority vote, and so that is free from manipulation by centers of power based on something like wealth or violent control over different people. So at the same time, you can have large scientific and natural resources to tackle immediate ecological concerns and to achieve important democratizing of the access to the benefits of technology, things like high-speed rail and potentially suborbital interplanetary or intraplanetary flights that would connect the world and do it in a very inexpensive manner once you've had those things built. So if you have those basic parts, which I know sounds kind of complicated, then I would feel pretty positive about having the potential to build something like I would call a communist society. So you really have to have all of those significant and stable building blocks in order to have a successful transition from the kind of history of class struggle and the creations of institutions to be able to maintain that class struggle or class dominance into one that doesn't have those. So what's really important right here is to make a important note that I'm not trying to be utopian. So I'm not making claims that this is going to be the end-all be-all of everything and that we won't have problems that we're going to face. We're not going to have some kind of immediate cure of racist or sexist tendencies, where we still are going to have an evolutionary heritage that makes us have conflict with one another. We create tribal relationships and all kinds of things that will continue to be problems. But the idea behind a socialist revolution to bring out some kind of communist future is that it's not the end of history itself. It would be the end of the history of human civilization as the history of class struggle. And so I think it's really important that people understand that this is not a utopian vision of creating a world in which there is, no more striving and no more purpose. That there is something that is actually more free and more worthwhile in this system than what seems like the high ideals of, say, the system that we live in. So, okay, what's it look like? A communist system, one that would come out of that transfer of ownership and control of the means of production and of the ways that we make decisions that affect a significant amount of people, would be to create a classless society. So what do I mean when I say a classless society? If you go back to the definitions episode, or very quickly, a class is a group of people who have a similar relationship to production. And so what capitalism does is that whereas in other economic systems and other modes of production, there are different classes, several different classes of people that have different kinds of roles in terms of production. Capitalism tends to consolidate those into two big ones: those who own the means of production and those who can work at the means of production, those who purchase other people's labor and those people who sell their labor. And so that is the representation of class conflict in capitalist society. So by removing by taking control over the state and removing the ability for the individuals to continue to have ownership of the means of production, what you do is you remove their ability to essentially be a class. So there's no more distinction between the relationships of production and different kinds of people, because by removing the ability to own the means of production and exploit other people or to pay other people to produce at those industries or in those centers of production and to get wealth out of them, what you're now having to do is that everyone is going to have the same relationship to production. The nice thing is that instead of having the state own the means of production, like you've seen in a lot of other places like China or the Soviet Union or other places, what you'd actually have is you've had them transferred over to cooperative enterprises that are run and owned and controlled by the workers. Now, the thing that's important about that, and if you want more in terms of the benefits of cooperative organization, definitely check out Richard Wolff and Democracy at Work. I think that cooperatives are really the way that you can see how the future would really work. And it's by democratically organizing the center of production, the place where you're doing work, so that everybody feels as though they're going to be able to contribute and have a say and really do something that they want to do. And this is the basis of a kind of community control. And the democratic process, a principled democratic process where you respect minority rights, you're not going to trample over people and start putting people in camps or gulags or anything like that, that people still have human rights and principles that you're going to abide by, that when you have disagreement, the disagreement does not result in war. You're going to have the ability for people to genuinely feel energized to participate in their society in a way that they don't do now. And I very much believe in the principle that if people can work together and feel free and able to do so, that the decisions that the body that they are a part of are going to make are going to be good decisions. So I think that is what you can understand the kind of system that I'm talking about. A democratized system, somewhat decentralized in terms of the ability for a number of people who right now have no ability to participate to suddenly participate, but still centralized in the fact that we have to participate together in an interconnected economy in which we're going to work hard enough to make sure that everybody has everything that they need and then some, and then to free ourselves to pursue all of the things that we really want to do to make our lives interesting and worthwhile and valuable. So one important thing that is going to be a big part of this for us is the role of automation. And so at the beginning of this episode, I used a clip from Star Trek because I think honestly, and a lot of people have said this, but that the vision of the system of the Federation and of Earth particularly in Star Trek is the kind of system that you can kind of use as a base marker of what we're talking about. Now, the important thing about that is the productive model. They have a thing called the replicator, which is basically the device, the writing device that Gene Roddenberry and the writers of Star Trek use to create a post-scarcity situation. Now, one argument against that's not possible is that you're not post-scarcity, right? The basis of economics is that there's scarcity. We are at a point in a lot of different kind of productive models, with capitalism being so productive and the introduction of things like automation and algorithmic thinking and advanced AI. You're talking about the ability of creating a lot of post-scarcity situations with what's on Earth right now. The ability to use renewable energy sources to get you to energy renewability, we're already at, in terms of food production, the ability to grow well beyond anything remotely close to scarcity. And so in terms of the basic needs, in terms of housing and access to water and those kinds of things, there is, for all intents and purposes, a post-scarcity situation on Earth right now. So we can understand that the vision of a post-scarcity society via a matter replicator isn't necessary. That we are so efficient, and that capitalism, and especially late-stage advanced capitalism, has produced the kind of technology that we can turn towards satisfying those kinds of things within the confines of what we're doing right now, is an important thing to consider, because the turn to automation and the turn to what would be necessary to create a Star Trek type of universe is going to come sooner than Gene Roddenberry thought, I'm pretty sure. And so we have to start thinking about that now. Star Trek is a good place to go. If you disagree with me, let me know. sensiblesocialistpodcast@gmail.com. Find me on social media. Let's talk about it. So, a big question with this whole thing is, why is anybody going to work? How are you really going to motivate people, right? Even in the discussions of Star Trek, there's this notion that you have to have some kind of financial incentive in order to motivate people.
How much does this thing cost?
The economics of the future is somewhat different. You see, money doesn't exist in the 24th century.
No money? You mean you don't get paid?
The acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force in our lives. We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity.
Sounds very nice, but it also kind of sounds a little communist. The citizens of the Federation are free to choose their own careers, and there is obviously a demand for engineers, designers, architects, builders, and developers, and there must be a meritocracy-based marketplace for the best and the brightest. Not everybody has the same talents. Why would any military organization settle for average or mediocre workers to build their vehicles and ships? Surely the best way to discover the best talent would be through vetting candidates and incentivizing the best of them through some kind of financial reward. Despite all the automation of the future, there are still a few menial type jobs knocking around in the 24th century, and some people still have to get their hands dirty scrubbing plasma conduits and relays, repairing warp cores, and even fixing the matter replicators themselves. There are clearly certain technical and highly skilled roles needed. Not everyone is going to be capable or interested in pursuing these roles, and therefore the financial incentive must be there to encourage these industries to flourish. Well, I can't figure it all out, but maybe you can in the comments below. Star Trek's economics, are they viable? How do you see them working out? And am I missing something?
There's a widespread belief that human nature is somehow inherently motivated by financial gain in order to do something. And I think that what's important is that even in the developments of something like evolutionary psychology, which I think can be a way to kind of justify a lot of current capitalist structures, within that idea, you see that definitely in the course of human history and the way that our evolution has actually happened, human beings can create and live in an incredibly diverse amount of situations, societies, and organizations. And from, horrible fascism and Genghis Khan style systems to, modern republics, you have the ability of human beings to live in a huge different number of different situations, and some will thrive, some have not, and that's the kind of system that you want to say, let's get the best system that can create the positives that have come out of all those systems, but not all of the negatives. And so this idea that there's some kind of fixed notion that human beings are only going to be motivated by financial gain, I don't think is true. I think that there are a lot of different things that will motivate people given a certain set of situations. And so if you made a society that people knew that they didn't have to work in order to not be impoverished, the reason that people would do the things they did was because they wanted to do them. And there is enough people who want to do enough things that if we can't find enough people that want to do it, we can find enough people who want to make a robot that can do it. So we're talking about a possibility where we can fill the gaps in which there are genuine kinds of work that human beings don't want to do and feel undignified doing. We should respect that people feel that way, and we should create means that they don't have to, so that everyone can be freed to pursue their propensities and capacities and abilities and interests in a way that is freed from the restrictions of having to produce things that they don't genuinely want to produce. That obviously brings me to a big point that is missed, I think, in a lot of the discussions about how we're going to make this future happen and what happens now. Because there is a lot of talk about in a lot of different circles about the role of automation, what it's going to do. There's suggestions that you're going to have to do some kind of universal basic income and those kinds of things. I've even talked about that before, even on this podcast. And the thing is that if you look at why there are different changes in history in terms of the mode of production, it's because of a change of technology, a massive change of technology that allows some new paradigm to really take center stage. And so when you look at the different kinds of systems, you have the ability to trace, especially when in capitalism, it comes with industrial development. And this steam engine and that the creation of large enterprises and the building of harnessing technology and using that to drive machines that are creating the ability to generate more and more production gives rise to capitalism. It comes along with it because it is a great way to harness that new use of that new technology and push it so that it can live up to probably one of its highest potentials. And so there's great work that's done by that system and grabbing hold of that new technological development and thrusting it into the future. But what we've seen now, especially in the last 50 years specifically, is the rise of a technological revolution with AI and automation and different kinds of technological revolutions that are on things like Moore's Law and all of these different kinds of different paradigm shift kinds of changes in the ability of how we're going to produce, who's going to produce, where we need to produce, and what's used to do it. And so these kinds of technological advancements, I don't think Marx could have ever really thought of. I mean, I thought that, I think it's pretty clear that he thought that the revolution where workers would take over the means of production was going to happen fairly soon, and he didn't see how long and protracted the period of capitalist economic situations could actually continue. But we're obviously at a point where it can't keep pace with what we're doing, and given the ecological concerns and the concerns over AI and automation, it's quite obviously that a change in the mode of production is going to happen, and how it's going to happen is not some kind of inevitable thing. It's going to come with an understanding of what it is that we need to build. And so having a future where we're talking about common ownership, democratic principles, the ability for the community, even if they're not necessarily working at the means of production, because we've freed so many people up to just be artists or actors or something that doesn't directly relate to production. What we do is still allow them to have an ability to participate genuinely in the things that they are doing, in the parts of the society that they are living in, and in a way that they feel is actually useful. And so if you really think about it, we can see that capitalism comes with the Industrial Revolution, and the technological revolution is a communist world. And it's with the post-scarcity economic ability that capitalism has given us, the technology that has developed out of it that could allow us to have these amazing inputs of different kinds of decentralized systems that could feed in information and get information so that we know just how hard we had to work and what we were free to be able to do outside of that, and really make a system that people have a more interest and a greater feeling of connectivity, solidarity, and understanding with one another, so that we don't feel like we have to fight and compete and feel alienated and powerless, but that we can feel connected, in control, and a part of a larger system with our friends, families, and community members, and that we can freely choose these kinds of organizations and freely choose those systems and world that we want to live in, so that we can create a society that might look something like Star Trek.
I think what we've gained far outweighs anything that might have been lost.
Huh? Well, I'm not so impressed with this future. Huge starships and weapons that can no doubt destroy entire cities, and military conquest as a way of life.
Is that what you see here?
Well, I know what you say, that this is a vessel of exploration and that your mission is to discover new worlds. But that's what the Spanish said.
Deck 36.
And the Dutch and the Portuguese. It's what all conquerors say. I'm sure that's what you told that blue skin fellow I just saw before you brought him here to serve you.
He's one of the thousands of species that we've encountered. We live in a peaceful federation with most of them. The people you see are here by choice.
So there are privileged few who serve on these ships, living in luxury and wanting for nothing. But what about everybody else? What about the poor? You ignore them.
Poverty was eliminated on Earth a long time ago, and a lot of other things disappeared with it. Hopelessness, despair, cruelty.
Young lady, I come from a time when men achieved power and wealth by standing on the backs of the poor, where prejudice and intolerance are commonplace, and power is an end unto itself. And you're telling me that isn't how it is anymore?
That's right.
Maybe. It's worth giving up cigars for, after all.
you like the Sensible Socialist podcast, check out the website, sensiblesocialist.com. Send an email to sensiblesocialistpodcast@gmail.com if you want to be on the podcast or anything like that. Otherwise, check us out on social media and we'll be there. Check us out, sensiblesocialist.com. Thanks.
In those times